I put a survey out earlier asking which left-wing clique are you. I got quite a bit of abuse for it because people in some of those groups obviously didn't like the idea they were called a clique. I apologize. I'll say group if you like. But there are so many different groups that it's hard to keep up with them. And I noticed people saying, "Oh, where does this group come from? Who's that group from?" So I wanted to speak about this with Ben Timberley, who's obviously behind Labour. We've had him on the show. Are you there, Ben?
I am indeed, mate. Good to see you.
All right, good to see you. Yeah, look, I know this has been a bit surprising to me because I thought we could make light of cliques and factions and groups, but people are very serious about their groups and also the don't criticize, just criticism of that is seen as bad. But I just want to go back to where these cliques and factions or groups, what should I call them first? Factions, is that better?
Yeah, I think that'll be less divisive, and
All
divisive
right, okay.
is the
All
word.
right, look, I don't, I didn't know about factions. You don't really know about factions until you've stepped on one of their toes. Because when you come into politics, you just think everyone's after the same kind of thing. There's no agendas going on behind it. We want justice, social justice, we want peace, those kind of principles that we all have on the left. But then I think what happens with me is if you criticize a line of a particular faction, then you can find out that isn't the line, and no, you can't. That's not what we're about. And then you think, oh, what? I thought we could just talk about this, and then it's no, you can't. There's a bit of that goes on, but also I just wanted to say I have been in factions, and the last one I was in. I think a lot of us were in this, was in Momentum. I was in Momentum in my local area, and the reason it was set up was because the right wing of the Labour Party was so organised and bringing all their gang to a meeting, and they were doing exactly what they were told. They were like, just they'd never attended any meetings, and they'd suddenly turn up and they'd all vote one way. So people on Jeremy Corbyn's supporting side thought we've got to match them with our kind of numbers, and it became like, how many numbers can you get? And to me, the faction thing is about making people into numbers rather than into making discussion happen and finding out what's the truth and being what we want to be, which is just evangelical about our belief and stuff like that. It's more like don't worry about all the issues, just turn up and vote as we tell you to do. That's the kind of thing. Um, and I don't think that's really the way that we can do politics. If we want to get people on our side, being in that kind of numbers game isn't possibly the best way to get new people involved, mobilize people, encourage them to get active. What's your take on it? I've said enough now. What do you make of what I've said about what factions are, and have they also outlived their purpose? Because we've lost to the right wing. Are we actually just being corrupted by them, and we're still playing their game? We're still in factions when we don't need to be in factions.
I agree. I think to take this back to the root cause of this issue, there are essentially two camps in the left wing world, in British left wing politics. There's one camp that pursues parliamentary victory to change the system by using the democratic process. And then there's the other camp that looks at it as, oh, we can magically find a box of AK-47s underneath our bed and go and have ourselves a communist revolution. You've got these two camps. Now, the problem is that there's all sorts of interplays here in terms of psychology, as in human psychology, group psychology, behavior. They all mix with these different camps and methods of achieving change, and they produce all kinds of weird and crazy and wacky results. And what we see is those who believe in changing democracy by actually using votes and getting elected and putting in place new policies and reform. We see those people desperately trying to win at all costs versus those people who want to stand around, shout a lot, do protests, do marches, all this sort of things, do campaigns, which I absolutely support and love their energy. I love the fact that they're trying to change something. But revolutions don't happen without people getting shot in the street, generally. You can have a peaceful revolution occasionally, but generally that doesn't happen. Revolution is a violent act, generally. Whereas actually changing things through reform, through a democratic process, can be achieved, but it's extremely difficult. And we've seen how difficult it is because we've seen all the subversion happen. And subversion is the number one word at play here. So if we look at what happened with Jeremy Corbyn and the Labour Party, he came this close to winning that election. And if there's one thing that we've seen in terms of close elections, it's very rare that they happen by themselves. They're normally nudged into existence and they're subverted into existence, whether it's through manipulation of media, whether it's through the actual manipulation of votes, or whether it's manipulation of the process that goes into getting people selected to stand in the first place. There's all sorts of different mechanisms that happen that these two camps of people are involved in and contribute to, and that essentially takes us away from where we want to be, which, as you quite rightly described, is actually putting in place a program of policies to change things, to make it work, and to actually come together and have consensus. And that ability to find consensus for the British left has never been further from being a reality. It is a major issue for us at the moment. And I think it's in no small part because it has been designed that way. The British left has always been fractious. But as it stands now, there are so many different factions, so many different organizations. It makes you wonder, has that situation been engineered? Are our opponents savvy enough to look at the left and go, let's add a few more groups into the mix. Let's add a few divisive topics into the mix. Let's add a few gender wars here, a few imperialist wars here, a few sort of paranoid conspiracy theories here. And all of these things have essentially created this mosaic of organizations that can't possibly work together because each one of them generally has their own hobby horse issue that they will never ever compromise on. And that hobby horse issue is normally so niche and fringe to the British public, in the public's eyes, not necessarily the group that's been promoting its eyes, that it means nobody can ever unite. They can't find a way to come together. And we see this state of affairs playing out right here, right now.
We see a lot of that on the show with people arguing in the chat. But I actually think it's good that people discuss things and debate and argue.
Yeah.
There's a lot. The problem, I think, with some of the factions is they don't talk to each other. They won't discuss, they won't platform each other.
Correct.
And that's really closed. It's full of fear as well. It makes me feel like we're fearful of debate. We're fearful of another argument. We can't actually put our argument against another person because we're fearful they'll destroy it. But actually, we have the arguments, we have the right ideas, so we shouldn't be fearful. We should be right out in the open saying, look, we've got all the right ideas. Come on then, tell us what's wrong with these. And then let them all argue and stuff. But I think the culture of the Labour Party with the Blairites being so intimidating and cunning and manipulative and using the bureaucracy, I think that's made us, who we'd call, say, on the left, it's made us fearful, it's made us divided. They've won in corrupting us and poisoning us as idealistic people who want to change the world. And we've now become bogged down in personalities and things like that. Now, I'm just going to show the results of the survey, which was really popular. People seem to want to know what clique they were going to be in the results. Now, the scoring was, I had to try and work out what kind of group you'd be in for different things, and it was really complicated, and I probably got loads of them wrong, and I know I've offended some people because they got the wrong one. But these were the results of the actual issues. I'll go through what people said on the issues because this is quite interesting. It does show there's actually quite a lot of division on particular issues that might be important to discuss. The first one is, do you think it's possible to transform Labour back to socialism? That's pretty conclusive. Only 13% think that. Over 2,000 people responded, and only 13% think that Labour can be transformed.
This is quite interesting. If you actually know the history of the Labour Party from its inception, it was never actually designed to put in place a socialist agenda. The Labour Party was essentially created by relevant powers that be to essentially subvert the communist movement and to bring it into British democracy. And at the last minute, there were various factions introduced into the Labour Party fold that stopped it from going down that fully socialist agenda. So over time, the left sort of tried to remold the Labour Party and actually make it socialist. And to some greater or lesser extents, they succeeded. But it never really became the vehicle that it was supposed to be. So it's interesting that in terms of being able to change Labour back to where it needs to be, I think it's more a case of actually trying to create something new in the right image that is not Labour, that is actually socialist, that currently no organisations have been able to achieve.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Yeah, it wasn't particularly designed to be socialist, but then this is a common one here. Do you think Labour's always better than the Tories? So they're like the least bad, if you want, the lesser of two evils, as they say. So only 25% think Labour is always better than the Tories, which for a group that's mostly we're all on the left pretty much, it's not that high, is it? It's quite low, do you think?
Yeah. Again, if you look at the reality of Labour versus the brand of Labour, the reality of Labour is the party that produced the Iraq War. It's the party that produced ID cards, papers, please. It's the sort of organisation that you look at and think, this is not in any way a good organisation fighting for the betterment of the UK. It's about vested interests, and it always has been, like every other political party that is in play at the moment. And again, this is the problem. If you look at the entire political spectrum as is, they are all a problem. If you vote for one, it's the least worst option. They've generally all got the same issues, which is that they buy into this British state apparatus and the idea of the new British Empire, which is a whole different conversation. But I think this is endemic, that this vote shows that people aren't buying this anymore. They don't believe the hype that any of these parties are actually going to do what they say they could.
25% is pretty low. No, it wouldn't have been that a year ago. How serious do you think the climate emergency is? From the group here, it's quite a lot. 57% see it as the highest level, extremely serious, and only 4 or 5% think it's not serious. Now, there's some people on the left who don't think the climate emergency is serious, and they have quite a big grouping on the left, don't they?
Yes, I think the climate emergency, that phrase is misleading to everybody because everybody interprets it in different ways. Now, I'm going to put my hands up and say I used to be a geologist. Geology is all about paleo environment. It's not about rocks, that's petrology. Paleo environments are what the climate used to be many years ago that helps us understand where it might go next. I've studied climate science, and the climate emergency to different people means completely different things. On one side, you've got people who say we're destroying the planet, we're polluting our biomes, we're watching species loss at a massive rate. On the other side, you've got people going, no, it's all about carbon. It's all about carbon. We must reduce the level of carbon. Now, that carbon idea was introduced by certain corporations that went, we can make money here. Honestly, the discussion around the climate emergency is so warped and covered in what I refer to as sentiment management, which is essentially controlling the narrative to feed certain agendas, that if you ask 10 people in the same room, they'll all have different interpretations of what the climate emergency actually is. And I think we are in a climate emergency, but it's more about how humanity responds to it to minimize damage from our existence on the planet. That's the climate emergency to me. I think a lot of people would agree with that. But I think a lot of other people with agendas of various different kinds for various different reasons would then try and reshape that narrative into their direction. And there needs to be a much greater discussion on this.
I didn't know that you were whatever it was that you said you were. I didn't know
Geologist.
that. But anyway, thank you for adding that to it. So look, we've got this one here. Do you support the right of individuals to legally challenge their gender identity on government documents? Yes, 60%. No, 21%. So it's not as divided as some people seem to think. The results don't seem as divided as I would have thought from the way that people make out this is a really big hot potato, but it isn't really, is it? It's made bigger than it is by the media, do you think?
Yeah, I think in terms of issues that are divisive, this is probably at the moment the biggest one that divides the left. And it's been engineered to be that way. There is a whole ideology that sits behind all of this, known as transhumanism, that promotes a certain direction of travel. And I've read all kinds of documentation from the council level, from NGOs, from charities, that has, again, a whole wide variety of different viewpoints on this issue and what gender is, what a woman is. And we've had a recent resolution from the UK government, a legal finding that says women are women. That is what they basically said. They clarified what they term as the gender identity. And that has understandably caused uproar across the left because there's a lot of people sitting on one side and a lot of people sitting on the other side. And when you find an issue like that is so divisive to the left, if you're an enemy of the left, you are going to promote this argument like crazy. You're not going to allow the left to find any way of coming to a consensus because it will stop us from ever uniting. And that is exactly what has happened.
From looking at that, I just don't think it's a big divisive issue that people are making out, and I've been wary of even discussing it because of the fear of it being so divisive. But I don't think it is. Anyway, I'll move on to the next question. What's your view on internationalism? Again, it's pretty one-sided there. There's no this idea that we should focus on national interests is very low on that.
Yeah. Again, this is an example of language and people not necessarily understanding what internationalism is or national interest is. If you say the word national to a lefty, people go, oh, nationalism. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, I can't have that. It's racist. It's bigoted. It's small-minded. It's the opposite of what we should be standing for as international socialists. And then you look at over the past decade, century of socialism, and you look at the actual share of who understood themselves as being a socialist in one country versus an international socialist. And you look at the divisions between Stalinists and Trotskyists and the different groupings of socialist and left thought. It honestly, again, you put 10 lefties in a room and they'll all have different ideas of what internationalism is, and they'll all have different interpretations of what socialism in one country is. And the problem with this is you've got agendas, again, playing out in different directions here about what they should stand for and what socialism in one country looks like versus what international socialism looks like. And they'll all be coming from different directions. And as usual, as a hot button issue for the left, there are going to be people who manipulate this to subvert and stop the left from ever finding consensus. And the big word that comes out of this is collectivism. If you as a left bloc can get together and actually talk about these issues and come to a definition of what the issue actually is and where we can find an agreement, then through that process, you can actually achieve unity. But as you quite rightly pointed out earlier, there's a lot of organizations on the left that don't want to have this conversation because it goes against their interests, both personally and as an organization.
Yeah, I mean, with that idea of coming to a decision, my parents were both Quakers, and in a Quaker meeting, they don't take votes because they know that will lose people who lose a vote. People who lose a vote will not go back. So what they do is deliberately talk until everyone is happy. And that is the opposite of what we do in our politics, really. We just keep pissing people off who lose a vote. So you get more and more factions that way. If people keep losing votes, there's how many factions can be grown out of that. Internationalism, you could have loads of issues on that would drive wedges between people in different areas of that issue.
Absolutely. There's two issues that came off this. One of my inspirations for being involved in politics is an organization known as the Zapatistas, which is essentially left-wing Mexican anarcho-syndicalists. And they have this process of consensus creation where they all sit in a room and they do exactly what you mentioned about Quakers. And they all sit there and talk about the topics until they reach that consensus. And often this can go on for days, weeks, months, but they get there. And when they have that consensus, it's powerful. And in the case of the Zapatistas, it was powerful enough to stop the Mexican government from ever putting control over them as a commune. It was an amazing thing to see. And they had this process of sitting there in meetings like that, basically saying whether they agree, disagree, or whether they're on the fence about it. And the second thing here, I think, is it comes back to, you look at any of the left-wing organizations, so Stop the War, the SWP, the AWL, the Socialist Party, the Labour Party.
Watch it. Momentum. Careful, there's a lot on here. Watch it. Go on.
Exactly. So if you look at any of these organizations, they generally get smaller and smaller and smaller as time goes on because the ideological winnowing happens and the positions get more entrenched and they get less and less open-minded to new directions and new ideas, mainly because they don't have the conversations. They don't try and help people understand that there is a vision here, there is a direction of travel, and there is a grand plan, and there is something that can actually be achieved by including everybody in that process. And that's the natural human tendency. You find your tribes and you have your echo chamber and you stick to it. You defend your people. That is how, in many cases, we are hardwired as humans. But it doesn't work in politics. You can't do that. The smaller you get, the less support you have, the less votes you can win. Now, if you're a revolutionary, you look at that as a good thing because you're going to have weapons and you're going to impose your will over everybody else anyway. You're going to have your revolution. You're going to make that thing happen. If you believe in democracy and the process of actually coming to consensus, again, that works against you because you're not going to have the numbers to win the vote. So either way, that winnowing, that narrowing down of opinion, that entrenchment of positions, it just hurts everybody. And the left in Britain, especially, is terrible for doing this.
Yeah. Oh, let's move on. The next one is, what's your position on capitalism? 59% it should be completely dismantled is the most. It should be reformed, 31%. Not many more saying we need more capitalism. That's a difficult question in a sense because we're in capitalism, so we have to live with it until the revolution. So does that indicate that there's 59% revolutionaries, do you think? Or are they ballot box people? Because I can't imagine how you could get that through Parliament. We are going to completely dismantle Capitalism Act of 2026. I mean, I can't see that happening. Can you?
So this is interesting. So personally, on this survey, I voted for dismantling capitalism, yet I'm a ballot box guy. So in my head, I'm going, how do I rationalize that decision to say, okay, this isn't a revolutionary act. This is a reform process to dismantle capitalism. I believe that the democratic process can be used to dismantle capitalism and put in place a better, more equitable system. I believe that can happen. And a lot of people look at me and go, oh, you're not naive, you're out of touch, you don't know this, you don't know. And I've made it my life's mission to study this stuff, and I believe it is firmly possible. However, other people don't. And this is the point. You've got to have those conversations. You've got to put forward good, strong ideas, thought out concepts, communicated effectively so that people can actually go, you know what, you might be right. And you can change people's minds. You can have that consensus. You can have that compromise. And again, on the left, and I know you've been in the same committee meetings that I have, people generally don't do that. They get their backs up because things are poorly communicated. They're not well thought through. People don't have the confidence and the conviction of their opinions to actually put that case forward. And they lose the argument, and then everybody just walks away and nothing happens. And this is a process that we've got to sort out on the left. And I think you've got a wonderful platform here, Crispin, to be able to help have those conversations.
I hope so. I hope so. Look, this is the next one. Do you support staying in NATO? 59%. I'm surprised it's not more,
Yeah.
really, because I don't know. That's just not my view. I'm not. If you do think NATO's good, then I'm not. Maybe it's your opinion, but maybe there's not enough information. We're not talking enough about NATO and stuff. It just seems strange that there's not. Anyway, I'm making judgment on people there, but I don't want to do that. Anyway, here's the next one.
I don't think people understand what NATO is, Crispin. That's the problem.
But this is a great answer, this one. Look at this one. This was in order to find out if people would support the Workers' Party. That was the point of this question. And if you look at it, it's all split all over. And a personality. I think we should talk about that. A personality can really split people, can't it? Yep. George Galloway's one, but he's not the only person that everyone likes or hates or has opinions on. If I said Owen Jones, that would be a similar response, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a real issue here in terms of the left and its ability to siphon fact from fiction. And I say that with love and care because I've been there. And I've made it my life's work to try and be able to see through this stuff and siphon fact from fiction. And the environment that we live in terms of the media, social media, the groups that are working actively to divide and undermine us, and they are still there and they are very good at what they do, it becomes very difficult to say, who is George Galloway? What is George Galloway? What does he actually support? What does he actually believe when you're surrounded by so much noise? And I think one of the problems we've got, this applies to everybody in terms of how we assess things on the left. There is a real difficulty in terms of being able to separate the person from the politics. So, for example, George is a Christian. He's a devoted Christian. I'm an atheist. But I respect George's right to have his faith, and I respect his ability to commit to his faith. I think that's quite a green flag as they go. Some of his politics I absolutely disagree with. But as a person, I don't really have an opinion on George. He's his own person. As long as he's true to himself and he's honest about what he believes, that's where my respect comes from. And if he acts on those beliefs, even more respect to him. But the problem is we're all taught to switch people off, to cancel people, to go, no, you're a terrible human being. You've uttered some heresy that we can't have. And one of the things I've studied over the years is how religious cults work, and theists, as they're known. There's this process known as shunning, If you go against the orthodoxy, if you go against the diktat, if you go against the line that is put in place, you are shunned, you are thrown out of the commune, thrown out of the cult, thrown out of the church. We're not allowed to talk to you, we're not allowed to work with you, or anything like that. And that process is a basic human instinct because you're different. That fear of difference, the left pretends that we don't have that fear of difference when absolutely we do. And unfortunately, as I think it was Jackie was talking about earlier, the gaslighting that the government puts us through, the left absolutely does it to itself. We pretend that we're better than normal people, better than right-wingers and fascists, when a lot of the time we are not. We have the same flaws that they do. And unfortunately, we're not honest about those. And that's where the hate towards people like Owen Jones and George Galloway, myself, others comes from, because we're different, we think differently, and we want to have that conversation just like you do, Crispin. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people that don't want that conversation to happen.
If we had Owen Jones and George Galloway on a discussion, or wouldn't that be great, just to have people talking it out and not their own little clique saying they don't like this guy and I never talk to him again? I
Absolutely.
get drawn in. I have to say, I get drawn into it sometimes because
Yeah.
it's almost like that it's being pushed on people to have a view on that. Anyway, let's have a look at the next one. This is interesting for me personally. Is Keir Starmer playing a tactical game and will put out more radical and socialist policies later in his term of office? My dad thinks he will. So I wanted to know if he was. There's a lot of people like my dad, but according to this, it's only 3%. So let's move on. I'll just show that to my dad that he's on his own. Do you think gender balance is important in political discussion? I get this sometimes on the show. People say you've got too many. You shouldn't be on here, Ben, because you're not
Yeah.
a woman.
White male.
I get told off for having too many men on, and honestly, sometimes I don't really know. I don't really know what to do if there are too many men on, and I think, oh, there's too many men. But then sometimes there's too many. I could say there's too many women on. Sometimes there are more women than men, and I feel quite strongly on this issue that it's been manipulated by the Blairites, who
Yeah.
constantly, Blair babes. How sexist can you get, and also be talking about how you've got diversity at the same time? It's like that issue to me. We have to look at that because I think Jackie Walker is not on the show because she's a woman. You know what I mean? I don't get it. What's your take on it? And I know I'll probably get in trouble for people be angry with me, but I think
Yeah.
that there's so many brilliant women that we don't need to have balance because actually there's probably more brilliant women than men.
So it's interesting. I'm going to take the heat for you here, Crispin, rather than get you into trouble or get myself into trouble. I'm a great believer in meritocracy. So excellent people should be there to deliver their excellence, regardless of who or what they are. Socialism, in my view, is blind. You don't need to be a minority to have a position. You just need to be the right person for the right job to do what needs to happen. Now, if there is an overt bias against a minority of any kind or any demographic of any kind, that needs to be eliminated because that stops equality and the equality of a situation from being able to be deployed. So, as you quite rightly said, having amazing women who do amazing things should be completely normal because they're amazing at what they do. It's got nothing to do with their identity, their gender, their demography, or anything like that. Now, interestingly, liberals, they look at this and go, oh no, the identity comes first. The identity of this person must absolutely be put first because that is what is important. And liberals, who are a very different beastie to a socialist, in my view, are the people who have been running our country for the past 100 odd years. And that we can see the direction of travel here. Hyper-individualism is an absolute scourge. It is an absolute plague. And it is playing out as the divisive tool of our times. And it stops us from achieving that unity that we're after and finding the consensus. Because if every single person has an issue that is the most important thing, whether it's identity, whether it's a belief, an ideology, that means that they can't compromise. They're stuck. And that narcissistic viewpoint that everybody seems to have been inducted through social media and environmental programming that we exist in, how are we going to achieve any kind of consensus if all of us have that one hot button issue that we cannot compromise, we must not compromise because, as L'Oreal says, you're worth it.
I think I could see comments coming in. What I said might not be popular, and also it's quite a divisive subject.
Yeah,
but
it is.
I do think that I just think sometimes we have to listen to the people who have got the best thing to say, and that is mostly women, if you want. I don't see how I should feel that it should be men and women equally. It's just I just look at what they've got to say. I can't really. Anyway, I'm going to move on. Is it right to this is the last question, by the way, in case everyone, if you've got your food burning in the oven, just you can turn it. Is it right to deplatform some people on the left? Yes, 11%. So not that many. The deplatforming thing is really poisonous to me because we just get no discussion, no debate. I was thinking George Galloway talks about him. He was deplatformed before he'd said anything about that Novara Media interview. He's deplatformed before he had any pictures with Andrew Tate. He was deplatformed well before that. And I don't even know why. Sometimes I don't even know why people are deplatformed. What's your take on it?
I think a lot of the time, personal interest comes into it. So there are beefs between people. So if they can put somebody down and stop them from progressing, they absolutely will. Why wouldn't they see them as a rival or as an enemy? So that happens. I think there are organizational interests here. For example, one organization in line for funding from an NGO channel, for example, Rosa Luxemburg Foundation, a product of the West German government, aka CIA front. Organizations like that dish out funding, so people's livelihoods depend on getting platforms, people's jobs depend on getting platforms, people's careers depend on getting platforms, people's book sales depend on getting platforms. It suddenly becomes like a marketplace. And if you can stifle the competition in terms of not letting them get the gig and you get the gig, then it suddenly becomes very obvious as to why people deplatform. When you look at examples like Owen Jones and George Galloway and many others who say inconvenient things, that I think is probably, in many cases, a knee-jerk reaction, a Puritanism. The left is very strong with, as a political breed, we are very pious. We don't like hearing heresy. And unfortunately, sometimes there are things that we need to hear, such as, for example, the status of British Empire, the fact that we do still live in a British Empire. The US is the East India Company of the modern era. And there's all sorts of people that will have absolutely extreme opinions about this and many other things. And because they have a vested interest in the discussion only going one way. It's narrative management, and it happens. The deplatforming tool is blunt, but it's effective, and it works a lot of the time.
Look, we've that's the end of those questions. I think it was an interesting way of going through the issues without really going into the cliques or sorry, the because I know if I were to identify some that would just piss people off. I don't really want to do that. I believe that if Jeremy Corbyn does put himself behind a new party, that we need to unite behind that and maybe take all those old ties away and get into this new sunlight of ideas. And we can win over reform voters. We can win over any voters if we have the right spirit and the right energy.
I agree. I think there needs to be a much greater emphasis on expertise. So, one of the things that the left is very good at is finding people who are really good at running campaigns and building organizations and then telling them to go away because they say something inconvenient. The left is great at that. So, we need to overcome that. But we also need, and this for me is the most important one, we as a political caucus are the most surveilled, the most undermined, the most subverted of any political caucus. And all the way through the noughties, back to the 70s, 60s, 50s, the left-wing movements have been infiltrated by spy cops, by agents provocateurs, by people who want to subvert and take our movement and make it work against itself. We saw this with the SWP, with spy cops and countless other organizations that have spawned out of the SWP. And this is all on record. This is all in newspapers. It's been written about massively. So I'm not saying anything controversial here. We need to start looking at these processes and defending ourselves against it. Stop believing what people tell you on Facebook. Just because they say it doesn't mean it's true. And we need to educate ourselves and work together to build that consensus, build that process. And I've said this to you before, Crispin, I'll say it again. I think you've got a wonderful platform here to regularly explore these ideas, have these conversations, and put the experts forward with good ideas. People who actually know what they're talking about, rather than somebody ranting on Facebook and saying, this is a good idea, this is a bad idea. Because as we've discussed, they will all have biases and agendas.
Yeah, well, look, thank you for joining us on this. I want to keep doing these discussions on what a new left party would look like until we hear about one,
Yes.
because I think we have to influence this and make as much noise as we can to push it as well. So, hopefully you'll come on again. We can talk about developments. Thank you, Ben.
By all means, thank you for having me.
Cheers.